It's been weeks since your last session, and your players were about to get onto a train to embark to one of the capitals called Dacia. You are so stupidly excited. You've spent the past few weeks doing everything you can to plan. The train is populated with NPCs. The bar has every drink you can imagine. The city is planned down to a T. You have the government structure in place. You have all the economics. Every store is populated with enchanted items. Every NPC has their moods for the day, and each individual day of your world's week has the weather planned on the hour. You have watched every YouTube creator that you can imagine talking about how to plan, and you have implemented everything to a T, and you are so proud and so ready. And you sit down at the table, you give the last recap, and then your players say, "We actually changed our mind. We're going to be traveling by foot." Yep, all your plans gone. I like to call this conundrum the over-planning, under-preparing. I, as a DM, hate planning. I hate it. Not because it's work or it's tedious, but because I don't think it's all that important. I like to consider myself always prepared, but I rarely plan things out. A city map that's been there since I created the world economics and how they affect the city is general, and it's not going to be changing whether the players go or not. But the nitty-gritty I don't really get down into because that's when so much goes to waste. How I do that is by being prepared. And I think if you learn how to prepare instead of plan, it is going to improve your DMing tenfold. So what's the difference between planning and preparing? Because a lot of people think it means the same thing. It doesn't. I like to think of planning as the bureaucracy behind functioning. It is the lines of paperwork you do to get anything done. Planning is the getting the ideas on paper part. Planning is the act of deciding what to do. And that is where I find a lot of DMs get into railroading habits. Because once you make those decisions, once you have it written down, once you have a plan, it can sometimes be very, very hard to abandon all that work you put in. So how we stop that is by being prepared. Now, what is preparing versus being planned? Well, preparing is the instinct, it is the knowledge, it is the active preparation. Planning is saying my players are going to get on this train, so here's all the details. Being prepared is thinking, well, my players might get on the train, so I'm gonna have to know how to roll up some NPCs just in case, but if they go by foot, I might want to consider getting out one of my encounter charts. Being prepared is saying no matter what they do, they're going to need some encounters. Let's make some generic situation encounters that can be fit into anything. Being prepared is knowing there's a 50-50 shot one of your players are going to cancel and how to handle that. Do I think planning is important to a point? Yes. However, I don't think anybody needs to know the price of a cow to have a full understanding of the economics in Dacia. But if somebody asks, it's 2 electrum to buy a cow. It's always got to be an electrum. The farmers prefer it. They don't get out much, but the electrum's shiny. This is totally a joke and so made up. But on the spot, it makes the players giggle. And again, most people aren't going to remember that. What's important are the big picture items that make your world feel alive. And everything else, if you're prepared properly, you can wing it. So I'm going to tell you some of the ways that I prepare at all times so that I can run a session whenever. And when I say whenever, I mean I literally have a tiny D20 that has mini D20s inside of it on my keychain. So if anybody asks me to play, we could be at a Dave & Buster's and I'm like, let's go, let's roll up some characters. It's something I take a lot of pride in, but it's not anything special. I'm just prepared. So let's talk about baseline preparedness. The things that I tend to try to keep on me in my car whenever I'm going out and about, and there's the potential of D&D. Firstly, I like to keep a dry erase board on me with a cheap Target picture frame that has like the grid on it, and some dry erase markers. It allows me to make maps of anything, anywhere, on the spot for any situation. You can also choose to have the little map square tiles and things like that. But there are so many different ways that you can have ready-to-go maps that are not individual scenarios. There's even theater of the mind, where you don't even necessarily need those things, but I much more prefer to be able to see it and share with my players. Next, if I know D&D is on the table, I always like to make sure I have enough dice for everyone. This is totally chock full of dice. These are just some of my D20s, and I still have other carrying bags just laying around all over the place. You don't even necessarily have to have expensive dice either. I'm a little bit of a dice dragon. I only like really pretty dice. I finally got my hands on some wooden ones recently, and I've been ecstatic. And one of our community members sent me dice, and I cried in absolute hysterics. But I am so grateful for all the dice that I get, and all the dice that I can afford whenever I can. And I want to share that with my players. I don't think I've gone more than 3 or 4 sessions without somebody forgetting their dice at home, or not owning dice in general. But the physical preparedness is different from DM to DM to how they run their sessions. However, the preparedness that will be able to help you in those situations where you can plan nothing and still run a session are mainly combat and world driven. Starting with the world, one of the most difficult things I find is making the world feel immersive, especially if you're going in with nothing. A couple of simple ways that I like to adjust with that is rolling a d12 for weather each day, and I use a d6 to figure out the mood of NPCs. I follow a lot of pages on Instagram that are homebrew items and the like, so if I get into a bind in a moment, I can just pull it up and find whatever looks shiny and balance it out for whatever level characters I have on the spot. Part of being prepared is not necessarily having to know the situation you're running, but knowing how to run a game. Part of being prepared is not necessarily even knowing the environment that you're taking your players into, but knowing how to build up and improvise. One way I do that is focusing on learning immersion. If I know they're gonna be in an icy climate, I'm gonna be watching videos on ice fishing. I already know how to ice fish, but just kind of refreshing some of the environment. I'm gonna watch some mountain climbing videos. I'm gonna get used to that environment and kind of ingrain it into my brain, because no matter where they're going to be stuck in that icy climate for at least one session of travel. I have playlists not of Caldacia or this specific tavern, but tavern music of the East, tavern music of the West, more serious music. I have playlists that are built for each individual climate instead of the unique individual cities. It's about not just knowing your world, but knowing how things work. It's about knowing the slight taste of salt on a breezy beach. It's about knowing the weird texture your hair gets if you've been in the Florida wind for too long. It is about knowing the slight bit of lightheadedness and confusion that comes with absolute desert heat. It's about knowing that when you're on a frozen lake at night, the ice thickens and it makes a dum noise over and over with little cracks that are like the lake is singing to you. It's knowing the beauty of nature. And when you know the beauty of nature, you can build any world to feel like you're alive in it like that. That's when the instinct part of being prepared comes in, is just knowing things so well, it's easy. I don't think it's necessarily easy for everybody. It takes practice, and then it slowly becomes easy over time, but it helps a lot to really know your stuff and know, not just memorize. It's like in school, when you love science class and you don't even have to study to be able to do flying colors 100% on your astronomy test. But then you go into math and they give you more equations and you start panicking. And then you go into English and you're like, well, I know how to speak English, but then they need you to memorize every poem by some weird obscure artist. And then you're like taking the test and it's like, what artist in 1865 did that? For some people, that is incredible. They love that and they don't even have to think twice. Not me. No, I don't know. I know Edgar Allan Poe. I like the Raven. That's it. That's where I'm at. So preparedness is also not just knowing your world or knowing the game. It's also knowing your limitations. Being prepared is knowing that you absolutely hate the Underdark, so you don't build an entrance to the Underdark any place near your players. Because anything about the Underdark is going to end up being memorization and planning that is going to be excessive, that you might forget or get stressed or not do as good at. It's knowing that you love ocean stuff, so maybe instead of having a land campaign, you do some pirates. Let's go. So there is that part of knowing yourself in there too. And then, of course, knowing your players. Because if you have some unhinged players, you have to have contingencies in place. I don't care what you're doing. And if you don't have those contingencies in place, but you've written this whole incredible experience, they're gonna just skip by that and you're not gonna know what to do. I learned this lesson very, very, very heartbreakingly when I had planned an entire city when I first started out. My players were on a cruise ship and there was this guy who was like, no, I give kind of tours of this, but he seemed a little shady. It was, of course, going to be a quest line around the fact that he was shady, but I had one player who decided she didn't want to go. Every other player wanted to go so badly. They were like, but we've heard of this island. We want to go to this island. This would be so cool. But because she didn't, I had to throw away all of it. But that was because I overplanned and I underprepared. So really it's a knowing. It's knowing how to run your world, how to handle your players, and how to do combat. Now, how I wing combat is a whole video in and of itself. That's a lot. Maybe soon. Maybe. But I feel like how to wing a combat is probably going to have to be like a live stream that's recorded and then like edited later, because part of the winging it is being able to bounce off my players in their situations, the way they react, how their characters handle things, and it's very individualized. But part of the basics is, one, I use a spin down die in almost all of my combats. I like to use it as a kind of ticking point to show where the turns are. Each turn it spins down one, and I like to add different effects that are battle puzzles on 5s, 2s, whatever the case may be per battle. It kind of works as a way to get my brain juices flowing to figure out, okay, what do I want to do that uses this in each combat? And that's what makes combat interesting. So for example, on every 5 turns, the field starts flooding a little bit and you need to get up higher because maybe it gets electrified every 2 turns. Maybe some of the battlefield is crumbling beneath them every 3 turns. And if their specific spot drops, then they have to use half of their movement to get themselves back and up onto the ledge. But I like to have active things affecting my players as they go along, and when they're focused on this, it's a lot easier for me to run the rest of combat without feeling the weight of how do I make this engaging by making monsters scary. Another part of that is knowing how to spot balance, which I feel like only really comes from experience, playing a lot, running a lot, and a lot of mistakes along the way. I use challenge rating as a base idea to know if it's in the general vicinity of where my characters are, but I never use it just straight up. I don't just go, well, they're supposed to be fighting CR7, let me just grab this. I tweak almost everything that comes across my table. And sometimes that's knowing that one of your players is unintentionally metagaming anytime you have a combat because they just know every single monster and NPC that the book has. So you take a bear and then suddenly turn it into a robot, but that's beside the point. That's a whole nother, yeah. But spot balancing is really important because most of the time I go to Google, I look up random stat sheets, and then I adjust it while they're rolling for initiative. Knowing how to make combat engaging instead of planning how a combat will be, yeah, man, that's being prepared. And of course, the last part of being prepared is references. References. Over on my Discord, I have individual guides to help you along your way. This is my guide to mini bosses, which I absolutely love, and how I run hunting, which is basically my encounter guide. I even have all my house rules written down in one spot for you. Whenever I see that you guys have particular interest in one thing or another, I try to add my physical guides on here for it, which my weather and NPC emotion guide I'll probably be putting up here in a couple of days too. Now, my guides are just the way that I like to do things, but stuff like this, real important. Having these things at your fingertips ready to go for any situation, that's being prepared. That doesn't plan anything. None of this tells me what I'm going to do in a session, but it does tell me if things come up, how to address those situations. But at the end of the day, I think the most important part about being prepared is experience. I think a lot of the things that I find easy when I first started out was horrifying to me, like deeply horrifying. My first ever time I DM'd ever was an online one-shot that I still have recorded, and it was not great. I think that a lot of my newer, like, cool creativity was coming through like instinct already, and that's what had my players decide to return, except in person. But yeah, I have not really tried online DMing since because I was so overwhelmed. I was stuttering through half of it. So my best advice that I can give you as far as being prepared versus planning is you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to get everything right. You're gonna fail, and you're gonna need to fail because that's where you're gonna learn. So the best thing I can tell you is to go out there and play. Join Roll20 or some of the other online things. Talk to some of your Discord friends and say, hey guys, let's try a one-shot tomorrow. Most D&D Discords have a looking for group section for like-minded individuals where you can even grab players there. But get out, play, learn, and then be prepared. So if you don't mind, share with me in the comments below your worst story of, oh my god, I planned so much and it's gone, or your best guide that helps you be prepared from session to session. And hopefully, I will see you guys in the next one. Take care, stay well. Bye, guys.
What is this? What is this?
Use the whole box of tissues to pack it.
Oh my gosh. Oh, this is such a nice little dice bag too. Oh my God. I'm sorry. They're chunks, but they're not. Feel. They're like the best fidgets ever. Oh,
wow.
my God. And mini dice. Oh my God.